punch is coming at you, a knife is coming at you, maybe even bullets are coming towards you. Those milliseconds when your life is on the line are what matters the most. I believe that proper gun education, having wider access, but also more educated gun ownership, could save many lives who find themselves in that position. I'm Adam Lauer. I live in the United States. Guns are not uncommon. Crime is not uncommon. And gun miscommunications and errors are also not uncommon. I believe that proper gun teaching would solve a lot of these issues. So today, I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about the history of firearms in the United States, some of the errors in attempting to control firearm violence, and an alternative and a rebuttal. Let's get into it, guys. So, gun ownership in the United States is a historical right. I like this a lot from David Kowalski in Gun Control Advocates Ignored What the Founding Fathers Wanted. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the American Revolution. At that time, we were under British control, we were under tyrannical control, and we were under unfair control. Our access to firearms meant that we could defend what we believed in, we could push that tyranny, we could push that oppression off of us, and we could become our own independent, fully functioning nation. That's what makes us the United States today. Also, I hear this a lot. A lot of people will say, oh, well, in a modern world, tyranny and oppression just doesn't really exist because countries are so much more advanced. And I'd like to give two examples to prove that that's not true. North Korea and Iran. In both of those countries, many people are unhappy with the tyrannical control that they are under, but they simply cannot do anything about it because they cannot defend themselves or push the violence off of themselves. They do not have those individual rights like we do, that guns provide. Now, second, I'm going to go into what's happening today and laws that are currently ineffective. A lot of laws right now just focus on making guns harder to get for people, for criminals, or for whoever. It's an emotional argument for sure, and on paper it could make sense, but as Ramesh Ponnaranu says in Why Gun Control Advocates Keep Failing, Ramesh states that many crimes are still committed to this day where gun control is more tighter, even though gun prevalence per capita isn't necessarily higher than back in the day when gun violence was less prevalent. He states that criminals are either making guns, having guns imported illegally, or they're having guns and they're making them untraceable. And so they're basically getting rid of documentation and they're getting rid of control systems that are already being put on people who are going to use firearms to defend themselves and to defend their individual liberties. So now you're at a 2-to-1 disadvantage where criminals are still having firearms and committing violence with firearms, and the people who need them to defend themselves and the people who are educated enough to use them for a good cause don't have those firearms. So now you're having a lot of people being killed, and they're being killed because they can't necessarily defend themselves. And the emotional response around guns is generally bad, despite guns not actually killing people and it being the person behind the gun that pulls the trigger. So if these methods that I've just told you about aren't working, what would be? And I'm going to talk about that right now. So I think responsibility and solving problems at the root cause would be most effective. And I don't think anyone said it better than John Miltimore. John Miltimore argued that, yes, a lot of these guns can be used to commit crimes, and a higher gun prevalence may count towards higher crime prevalence, but educating current gun owners and having a good mindset for all gun owners around guns would be also much more effective. A lot of gun accidents actually happen because people aren't sure how to use firearms. They're afraid of firearms. Someone from their family had a firearm and they're afraid of it. But a lot of that isn't necessarily true. You know, my family, both my mother and my father have CPLs, which are concealed pistol licenses, and none of my parents have committed crimes. So I believe that educating people would be the highest or highest efficiency, highest rate of return on having guns still available for those who need to defend themselves, those who want to protect their individual liberties, why we're still here today, but also have less gun violence, less bad reactions around guns that shouldn't necessarily be happening. You know, a lot of people will say, you hear this all the time, more guns are just more bad. You know, any type of strict gun control should help because there would be less guns. And I agree that a lot of this can sound like it would work. It's a very emotionally appealing argument. But I'd just like to say, a lot of these, as I've demonstrated, as Ramesh demonstrated, a lot of these aren't based on nothing because the policies have been measured to be little or not even effective at all. And so let me just make something up on the spot for you guys. What if we made it, instead of making guns so much harder to get for not only criminals but also people who need them, why don't we make it so that if you want to buy a gun, you need at least 20 hours of education, you need manual mandated range time, practicing firing the firearm, you need to have an allocation for a safe to store the firearm away from children, and you need to have a CPL or you need to have a license or also a background check to own the firearm. Let's not get rid of firearms. Let's make the education higher around firearms so we're less scared, we're less fearful, and also we know how to use the firearm properly so those of us who need to defend ourselves can defend ourselves because, well, if a bullet's fired at you from an illegal firearm, there's nothing you can really do if you don't have a firearm. You're pretty much dead. So, in all, what I just talked about was the history of firearms in the United States, why they're here, and why we're here basically today, why we're not a British colony, because of our access to firearms. There is still tyranny present. Current, gun laws, just generalized gun laws. I understand and I agree that guns can be dangerous in the wrong hands, but that doesn't mean that every gun is going to be in the wrong hands. So we just talked about why laws are ineffective. And I just gave an alternative, and John Miltimore also gave alternatives, such as solving the root cause, because gun prevalence per capita has not really increased since the 1950s, but gun violence has. So something is not adding up because the variable of guns is just a control group. That's a control group. If you guys have taken science, you know that the control group is unchanging. So we need to get down to the individual person and why some people that shouldn't have guns are having guns. And in all, I don't want you guys to go out and buy a gun right now. I'm not saying go out and buy a gun, but I just don't want us thinking that guns equal bad and that if you're anywhere near a firearm, it's bad. I agree some people with firearms are bad, but they shouldn't have that firearm in the first place. And if someone bad has a firearm, you should also have a firearm to stand your ground and save your life, save your family's life. And another thing, I hope my presentation equals good. Thank you guys so much.